Hi there, it's Marcus here, Marcus Bussey. I'm one of the instructors for the Urban Imaginaries Summer School. I'll be doing dancing and moving things with you and also discussing forms and functions of urban environments, providing historical and futures context for things. But it occurred to me that we really need to give you some introduction to what futures thinking, future studies, and urban imaginaries might be all about. So here I am in Lisbon already. Right behind me here is an urban imaginary breaking through into the urban space. The imagination is a tool. It's a tool that has a context. It grows out of your experiences, the cultures that we've all grown up in and evolved in, I guess. It has a history of longing often to overcome the quotidien, I love that word, the ordinary, the average, the everyday, those things that seem to oppress us and hold us down. The imagination has a function also as a problem solver. It can anticipate, oh, this might happen, so I better do that. But it can also provide holistic encounters with issues that we may only partially be aware of. And it can then flexibly shift those encounters in a way that often provides a range of alternative solutions or alternative approaches. So imagination is about the alternatives. Those alternatives can be positive or negative. You can anticipate bad things or good things. It's cup half full, cup half empty sort of space. But it's much more than that. For me, the imagination needs a context. There have been multiple uses of the word imagination combined with an adjective. Moral imaginations, futures imaginations, anticipatory imaginations, imagination activists, and so on. So the imagination itself needs to be understood as something that evolves in context. Where does that take us? Well, it takes us into the world of encounters, but it also takes us into our own inner world. It's a world where we must reflect deeply on the way our imagination works. The imagination is part of a cognitive setup or framework that we've developed over many, many years. It depends very much on whether we've experienced trauma in life. It depends on the kind of nurturing and rearing, our educational systems, our cultures, and so on. It makes it, therefore, a wonderfully rich area in which to reflect upon how do we make sense of the world we inhabit. And in our context, how do we imagine cities evolving over the next century or two, for instance? And that's what interests me, because cities are pressure cookers in which human culture, human societies, human imaginations have evolved over millennia. And those cities that we currently inhabit are showing signs of wear and tear and stress. But they're also pointing interesting ways into the future. But I'm going to step back from all of that. So I'm just providing with a little bit of context. But I love that break in the wall there, where walking up a street today in Lisbon, I came across some rather beautiful old architecture, the old cobbled streets and so on, quite a bit of rubbish on the streets as well. And then there was this window into another world. It's a somewhat solar punk world in some respects. It's certainly eco-cultural or ecological cultural. It's saying there are ways in which nature breaks into the urban environment. The urban and the natural are not actually separate. And wonderfully, as I was walking back down the street about 2 hours after this, a group of parrots flew over my head. So there is something there that we engage with. I am, through my discrete sets of experience, linking them together with my imagination and telling stories. So that's also important. But I've got this lovely, hopefully it's lovely, I like it, PowerPoint to share with you. And I want to walk you through some of the basic concepts in futures work from, of course, it's from my perspective, but I've been teaching and working in the futures area for over 20 years. So, you know, I trust at least that there is something useful in this material for you. So let me go to share screen now. Here we go, one there, go to share. And then I will get that and that. Okay, so what is futures thinking? Well, it's about letting, like this cage suggests, letting something fly free. It's about unshackling, releasing, freeing our imaginations to think in ways that may enable alternatives to emerge. I've always felt, I'm very much a pragmatist in this, that thinking, imagining our inner world deeply influences how we act and behave in the world. There are, I mean, we are constructed through our set of relationships. In fact, relationships in themselves are the basis for our understanding of sense-making, so they're the basis of reality. So let's move into this then and say, look, future thinking is an invitation to think outside the box. So what are my opening thoughts? So I have a few here. So futures thinking for me allows us to explore futures we would wish for. In other words, you know, the preferred future, optimal futures, inclusive futures from which a better world is emerging, futures in which nature finds its place alongside human activity, not as a servant or as a resource to activity. For instance, a world in which poverty or violence decreases, a world in which marginalized groups are embraced and included and recognized for bringing things of real worth to our worlds. Future thinking is also based on a set of powerful and yet simple tools, okay, that enable us to explore physical and social, economic, cultural, spiritual, mysterious shifts. I love the mysterious, that need to occur. And that means that these things need to occur in order for our best futures to emerge, okay? They can be playful too, exciting, even elegant. But this does not mean it cannot be clunky, challenging, even overwhelming. There's nothing safe or sure about futures thinking. There are so many variables at work in that context. Finally, we don't do it on our own. Even when you are on your own, I'm in my office here, and I'm on my own, but I'm not really. I'm on my own with a cluster of people, voices, readings, thoughts, everything from my parents and my siblings and my wife and my kids through to the big names, Foucault, Marx, Plato, Socrates, Buddha. These are beings that are with me in a way that without whom, I should say, I would have no voice at all. I'd be an amoeba. And even amoebas have their communities, okay? And their world is sensory and sensorial. My world is sensorial cultural or aesthetic, phenomenological, embodied. It's a very interesting space to be, but it's a space that's crowded with voices in my ear that I don't even recognize. Some years ago, I was teaching a master's course in Singapore, and over that period, I developed a set of principles. I'm not going to read all of these to you, but I will share the paper concepts and effects that accompanies these thoughts. But I'm going to pick a couple out in the next slide or two just to touch on. But, you know, there are things like futures, the future, whatever it is a principle that we anticipate. Therefore, we're going to act according to how we see the future. It is a principle of present action, point number one. We can study how we think about the future by its effects on our activities today. Now, I'm not saying my activity or your, but our collective activities, our political, our economic decisions that continue to believe that the world is an infinite resource are going to cannibalize and, destroy the future of those who will be here in 1 or 2 or 3 centuries or millennia, but will be left with the husk of a planet because early generations assumed that the planet was there as an infinite resource. That's one effect. So, yeah, and each one, you can find examples for each of these, okay? But I'm going to keep moving now, and I'll let you explore those. Actually, I can't. I've got to talk about number 13. Number 13, one of those great numbers in human symbolic cultural history. Any useful idea about the future must at first appear to be ridiculous. Come on, we can't have cities like that. Lisbon could never be like this. Paris could never be like that. Sydney in Australia could never be like that. But can it? Can we think of the most foolish and preposterous thing about a city? A city is no longer an urban conglomerate concentration, but a dispersed human process embedded in natural green environments, very much a solar punk type world. If you don't know what solar punk is, look it up. There are some great books on it. I'm a total fan at the moment. So, what can I say? Well, first of all, this is from that paper, 2014. These principles that I've just shown you structure both our reflection and practice and generate an open dynamic space for cultural evolution and social learning. Historically, whatever else we can say about our present time, we're in a period of what David Corton in 2006, and he wrote it before that, called waking up. Joanna Macy also talking about that, in which self-consciousness is no longer a privilege of the elites. One of the things about the imagination and about social dreaming and action is that it has been increasingly democratized. It's not saying that everybody, no, we're talking human people on the planet, everybody's got the same access to power and decision-making and influence, but it is increasingly democratized, and we're increasingly seeing people taking action on behalf of those who perhaps are unable to take action. Think about it. Think about, I don't know, Greta Thunberg and others taking action on behalf of those non-humans that can't take action. Think about the riots in France at the moment for the young 17-year-old lad who was shot dead by the police. There are plenty of ways in which people are taking action. So the future acts as an attractor in this process and demands attention in a way that it did not in pre-modernity, where the future was a given. It was pretty, in Western society, it was a Christian millennial apocalyptic future, okay? Totally different from us today, where the future has been built around this myth of progress. I'm not saying that we can't make progress, but I don't think progress can be material forever. I think we make psychological, personal, emotional, spiritual progress. I think culturally we can progress. Simply progress has always been about there's more for everybody, let's say. We can control and fix the world. The more for everybody needs to shift from being more things to more emotional, spiritual, cultural riches. Control needs to be put aside and replaced with something like co-creation. Or I've always liked the concept from Riane Eisler, who talks about participatory futures, where we are actually partnerships, working in partnership with others, other cultures, other social forces, and ecological forces in the living planet. So this is where we're heading here. My tattoo, I love this. I designed this for another paper that I was working on, at the same time in Singapore, actually, and I chose the dragon as the motif here because in Chinese culture, the dragon is not this sort of sinister, yucky figure. It's a figure of, you could say, of hope and vibrancy. I was working on a dragon kiln, and those dragon kilns were at risk of being knocked down because the Singaporean government wanted to put a condominium or whatever it was. I have no idea now, can't remember. But these were the last two dragon kilns in Singapore. They dated back to the British Raj, and they were incredibly vibrant centres around which local people, local communities had built artistic processes. They had refired them, refired in the sense of rekindled them. They were wood fired, and they made wonderful ceramics in them today. But 50, 60, 70 years ago, the British were knocking out bricks to build Singapore and Malaysia and other very functional things. So to me, I said, when we were working on this, I said, look, it's not one past. There are multiple pasts, there are multiple presents, and there are multiple futures. All 45 of you students are individuals coming from different places with different histories, different life biography trajectories. We are all intersecting for a moment here in Lisbon, going to have a blast, I'm sure. And that means that these presents are colliding. But what each one of you hears, perceives, takes away, understands from our encounters is going to be unique. And that's fantastic. And it means that we, like a fractal, go out and off you go into the futures in which you will take maybe one or two, three of the tools, some of the senses of, oh, these guys are on about something quite a different space, and they may come back to you or percolate or like yeast expand over your next decade or two in professional life or artistic life or even just your personal lives and become other things. I just love it. So temporality is folded. It is not linear. It is like a massive ecosystem in which there are multiple temporalities working at once. And I could go into that for ages because I'm a bit of a geek, but I'm going to keep moving. One of the things that I brought up in that list I gave you of the 13 points for concepts is that of the open and the closed future. So an open future, okay, is a future that allows for the alternatives to emerge. A closed future is where some authority or cultural taboo or whatever closes down many of the alternatives. No, it's got to be like this. A city has to have a CBD. It has to have control over all the assets and resources within that environment. That's a closed future, whereas a porous, open future allows for creativity, imagination, innovation in ways that a closed future doesn't. So 2 points I make here. We often live somebody else's future. That's a closed future. But that futures sit, like imagination, in a context. And that's important to understand, that context determines so much about how futures and our futures work, my futures work, Maya's futures work, Maya Van Leeuwenhoek, who's going to be presenting much of the futures material for you, for instance, that our contexts are very much determined by, our futures work is very much determined by our context. It's the other way around. I was getting mixed up. So alternatives for me equal freedom. There needs to be, we all long for increased freedom, but freedom should not come at the cost of somebody else's freedom, of course, or the planet's freedom and a species' freedom. So it's a negotiated space. It's not there's no fully ever open, but there is openness, and openness is a principle. Futures thinking offers us a mix of anticipatory critique, that means who wins and who loses, with futures decisions, strategic orientation, how are we going to manage this, and imaginative processes, okay? Some of those processes, particularly Maya will be introducing you to on Monday. The goal is to free us a little from the tyranny of the present, to make extra space for us to make informed, not just choices, but decisions, and to set about acting in ways that allow for these greater possibilities for the urban in our context. So it is designed to help us see our present as remarkable or even a surprise. And the word is designed. Design thinking, you probably all know about it already, is an equally rich, very much a futures-oriented process as well. So, talking about that, yes, Maya has written this great paper, and I'll be making that available to you as well. The citation for the paper is underneath this slide. I'll make this PowerPoint available to you as well. So she says two really interesting things. She has many things to say, but in this paper, she points out two things. She says, it's my view that futures and MAD. Oh, what's MAD? Not mutually assured destruction. Nope. It's media, arts, and design. Three areas that Maya is deeply involved with. So futures and media, arts, and design are well suited to working together en route to a society where creative processes, wonderful things, activate collective imagination. There's that word again, imagination, with a keen awareness that multiple futures, plural futures, are possible. She describes this as polyamorous or polyamory, which is a great word meaning multiple loves, okay? We can love many things, and futurists, we're not subject-specific specialists. We're people who see possibility through the rich intersections of resources that are available to us in a context. So it could be history, it could be design, engineering, dentistry, economics, it could be politics, policy, and education, and urban planning. These things all come together and they coalesce in different ways. And a futurist draws on the skills of those who have spent many years of their lives training and practicing in areas that I don't know about, but I can ask the kind of questions that and set about activities that will allow them to see richer possibilities. One of the great things about disciplines is that they discipline you and you can do your engineering really well. But the problem with the discipline is that it often leads to very narrow thinking. Our world is so complex, intermixed, messy, that we can't function any longer with that kind of discipline-specific narrowness. We need to fall in love with many things and practice polyamory and polylogs. So she goes on to say a few pages later, considering how futures must partner with multiple other fields and how overall, based on specific preferences and predilections of individual futurists, Maya and I have quite different life experiences, but we're both acting as futurists in the context of this course. Future seems to be able to love most and any subject or method. That is so true of me. I am just compulsive about, anything that comes across my desk, whether it's a dinosaur's tooth, a Paleolithic axe, or a piece of, something from the inside of an Apple iPhone type thing. All of that means something to me. So with that kind of polyamorous, in love with everything, considering also that MAD, media, arts and design, have as many different associations, relationships through privileged, though privileged, they look distinctly like a polyamorous one. So these are the relationships that count, the mixing together of, in some aspects, we could call it transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary. But I really like this because it's very liquid. When we talk about the polyamorous, it's a very liquid metaphor for how our thinking and our practices need to shape and change our processes regarding urban planning and city imaginaries, for instance. So I want you to do a little activity. Pencil and paper in hand, I want you to think of an issue, something that bugs you or something that you're excited about. I'm going to choose education simply because I use it as an example after this little exercise. What do you hear about that issue in the news or the media? Okay. What kind of news bites, sound bites? What do the politicians say? What do protest groups have to say? And so on. Scribble down a couple of points while I have a drink of water. Okay, I'm not giving you much time, am I? Maybe you pause it if you've right here and keep on scribbling, because I have to keep moving. So now, who do we look to in order to fix or blame or address that matter? Okay, who do we turn to? Okay, is it a city planner? Is it an educator? Is it the classroom teacher? I'm talking education, of course. Or is it the Prime Minister or the President or, you know, the IMF or whoever, the police, urban crime, youth crime, drugs, you know, whatever the issue was? Who do we look to in order to fix it? Who's going to fix it? But who do we also blame? Oh, those guys are just so corrupt. They're useless. They're lazy, or whatever. Then, when you've scribbled down a few of those, what assumptions about the world are we looking at? Okay, so if I'm blaming prime ministers and presidents, it's often because I see the world is built up of people who make decisions and I don't make any. Okay, I'm passive. Politics is active. Maybe if I'm thinking in terms of drugs and law and order, my worldview, my way of seeing the world is one of risk, one in which danger lurks around every corner, one in which I can't trust people, especially the young. The young today, they're not like they were in my day. You know, those sorts of stories. This is the way we can often set the scene in which who to blame makes sense, or who's going to fix it makes sense, and it also makes sense of what we're hearing. But there's another thing I want you to do. So if you're still scribbling, pause. Okay, behind that, I almost touched on it with this other one, is there a story or a metaphor or a myth that you can think of? Are we in a Cinderella world where all those big mean sisters are beating me up, you know, and taking everything and I can't go? Or what other kind of story? An anchor that sums it up somehow. Okay, a stitch in time saves nine. That's a very English 19th century Victorian sort of thing. Or is there some other kind of myth? The myth of the powerful father, the male figure that holds it all together, the hero figure, in other words, in a sense. If you pause if you need to, this is a way of seeing the world as layered and linked. Each one of these elements influences and impacts and is linked to each other. Okay, we call it causal layered analysis. So, the comfort of the familiar. Let me talk about education. You all know education. You're all in education. So let me use education. So quite a few years ago, I did very simple taxonomical, you could call it, CLAs on education. And these are a couple of things that I came up with. So first of all, the CLA is comprised of litany, that's surface noise, systems, the systems that run the world, you might say, the world views. This is the assumptions about how the world works that inform the systems, and the myths, metaphors that sit behind that. So, and educational environment, what do we see? Well, we see at the top in litany information, multiplication tables, historical dates, spelling, grammar, tests, you know, all the sorts of things we would associate with traditional orthodox schools. What runs this? Well, testing, of course, systems manage testing. We're all about performance and performativity. Disciplinary forms, not reforms, disciplinary forms, school rules, curricular guidelines, all those sorts of things that happen. For you, when you're doing your assessments, especially in undergraduate, you probably had rubrics that told you these things. Okay, that's the sort of stuff that systems come up with. Worldviews are commitment to enlightenment, you know, that education is going to make the world a better place. Reason and scientific method are what we look to. Of course, we don't want any of those sort of weirdos who do spiritual things or believe in, you know, let's say the vibes. Okay, no. We've got reason and scientific method, and that will sort it out. That informs the testing and the disciplines, and it's what we get, you know, in micro forms here with tables and historical dates, spelling, grammar, etc. Behind that, we have myths like and stories like nationalism and consumerism, the images and the stories that provide the emotional energy for what we're talking about here above. and blend with the family, communal, and personal stories. Nationalism is something that is linked very much to education. Education, one of the things it does is it instills nationalism. We often have children singing the national anthem at least once a week, and so on. We have flags associated with education, and so on. But we also say that the nation's future and prosperity depends on the education of our young people, and so on. So that's a myth. I'm going to approach it another way. So CLA, again, looking at it. So the litany is often punitive. We've got to blame and punish someone. It's often hyperbolic. It exaggerates things. It's about random chaos, reaction, shame, and blame. What happens here at the agency level, that's what you and I can do. We have individuals alone in the world, isolated. We have enemy. It's discreet. It's unreflective. We're like zombies just running around chasing our tails, trying to fix these things. Systems about laws, rules, authority. Okay, we have a managed persona. I must conform individuals as a number, as a customer or whatever. At the worldview level, we have institutions that create violence. Education systems, for instance, prison systems, hospital systems, institutions in themselves are violent. World, a violent place. So violence meets violence, okay? Force and order, authoritarianism versus the anarchic and the panarchic. Here, agency is collective. We must act as communities. We must be wedded to our institutions. Our identity depends upon it. What kind of myth metaphor? Well, we've got Christian ones like Abraham, the father of his people. Zeus kills his father. Okay, Zeus was a very naughty boy, but then he becomes a very thoughtful father himself. Or we could turn to modern mythology, Darth Vader, or we can go back to the Bible, prodigal son. Or we can have Luke Skywalker, who was a prodigal son for Darth Vader, but Darth Vader was a prodigal son too, wasn't he? If you know your Star Wars stories. Agency then lies in how we tell the story. What sort of stories are we going to be? Are we going to be bards and prophets who tell stories? Different stories, but for the urban futures we desire. It's a lot of fun doing this kind of thing. So, what can I say? Sahel and Ayatollah, one of the world's top futurists, makes this point about method. And he's the guy that actually designed CLA, and people like me have run with it. But yeah, it's one method amongst many. But he makes this really interesting point about the method. As a method, its utility is not in predicting the future per se, as in creating transformative spaces. That's what futurists are really doing, for the analysis and creation of alternative futures. It's also useful in developing more robust, efficient, and effective, deeper, inclusive, longer-term policy and strategy. God, that was a mouthful, wasn't it? But I think that's really what we need to understand. And it's not just CLA that can do that. Multiple tools come together to coalesce and create spaces in which robust, efficient, effective, deeper, inclusive, longer-term policy and strategies can emerge. Okay. So then how do we tell the story? Narrative foresight. And this is linked very much in my mind, and also my own work, to the intimate. What goes on inside us? As a species, we are collectivities. We are a relational species, in other words. I mentioned that earlier. As collectivities, we are multi-species, okay? My body is made up of multiple other organisms working in collaboration with my own cells. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Culture you can come up with any number of strategies. We've seen it, and you've all seen it, whether you've been aware of it or not, in multiple contexts, in which somebody comes with a great idea, sets up the strategy, but it fails. Because the culture, let's say culture of authoritarianism, a culture of passivity within institutions, whatever it might be, is like this. Or education, we can see it often. Societies, policy people have come up with amazing innovations in education. Many of them have failed. Why? Because they haven't been, they haven't aligned with dominant cultural perceptions of the time. Parents don't want to take the risk of sending their kids off to schools that are going to do weird things. They want what they know. Okay, we have imagined orders at work here, that there are certain kinds of relationships that we can just rely on, but they're just made up. I'm drawing on Yuval Harari here with his book Sapiens, where he talks about imagined orders a lot. Basically, there is nothing given that our culture should be like it is. Otherwise, we will just have one culture across the planet. Whereas, as we all know, we can go from Portugal across the border to Spain, which is not far away, and we'll find that things are quite different. Culturally, of course, we can see many overlays, many similarities, but Portugal is not Spain and Spain is not Portugal. And if you go north, you can't say, well, Spain is like France or like Holland or like Sweden or, like that. No, it doesn't. So we understand that, or we live in imagined orders that are called cultures. And cultures have practices and principles around which they work. Okay, so when we're dealing with how do we imagine a city, for instance, we have to say, well, what kind of city? Lisbon is not Madrid, is not Dubai, is not Delhi, New Delhi in India, is not Beijing or Shanghai, and is not New York. I'm just sort of trying to circle, that all, they have similar features. You can recognize the city. Gosh, there are lots of people in this city. For instance, there are tall buildings, but not tall. I mean, Lisbon doesn't have tall buildings like, Paris or London does. It's a totally different space. And finally, co-creating narratives to enable alternatives. So one of the things that we're really doing when we're looking at urban futures is trying to work out what kind of stories, convincing, seductive, exciting stories can we tell about cities that are going to get people moving in that direction. What I like to do is play a lot. You're going to know that quite quickly. So one of the things that I'm looking at is how do we actually get into our imaginations and release the energy. One of the things I've been doing recently in the last couple of years is looking at, well, how do we actually create specific, we can call them rituals, out of which new thinking can emerge. But also rituals are about forging communities and creating what you might call a sacred space in which to start dreaming beyond the ordinary. Okay, so here I have a group of friends and some people I'd never met before who came along to a ritual that I conducted at my own university. That's the university grounds there. Okay, and they are walking in a circle as a story is being created. Okay, so beyond that, then, we can also CLA ourselves using that process that I walked you through. CLA as well can be applied not just to the external world, but to the inner world of meaning. The litany of how do I understand myself, the system of who am I, the discourses of architecture of the mind, what are the basic assumptions about reality that I have, and the foundational myths and metaphors that define the construction of my identity. I'm a powerless woman in a man's world. Now, it's not going to get you very far, but it might be a story that's whispered in the back of your mind. Or I am really angry because the world has not given me my due. Who said the world needs to give you your due? This is the other side of it. We can play with these things. So CLA of self is an interesting one. It's all about making sense of the real. This is me talking now. CLA, like all maps, is an analog for the real, but not in the mimetic, in copy sense, rather as an abstract representation or a symbol that condenses the properties, marks, the contours, the forms of reality into a system of signs. Take a little breath, another mouthful of water. So, I'm talking futures. I'm talking about CLA because it's a great example for futures thinking, but it's not the only one, and we're not going to do much CLA in this coming week, actually. I just want to alert you to the fact that there are different kinds of futures. There are these glossy, flashed ones, which not just me, Richard Slaughter was actually coined the phrase, I think, but I could be wrong, pop futurists. There are empiricists. That means people who like to crunch the data, the numbers, to sort of predict where things are going in the future. There are cultural futurists that like to interpret cultural shifts. They are often on radio shows talking about the latest cooking fad or dress or music. There are critical futurists who are looking at power relationships in the future. There are action learning futurists who want to galvanize action and get things happening in local communities or industry or business. And there are those who are working for transformative, for more less well-defined forms of futures. Another way of looking at it is to talk about, well, there's the business, we'll just keep doing what we're doing, business as usual. There are used futures. That's where, oh, I'm an impoverished country, but I want to be like America or, some other rich place. So we're going to copy what they're doing. Lots of cars, lots of roads. And that's a used future because the world that created America is already well passing. But I want to leap into that future. There are disowned futures that we actually don't want to talk about. I don't know about climate change. You totally disown it. Therefore, you will go to a business as usual or a used future and pretend that future over there, the one of climate change, sea level rise, whatever, is not going to happen. Okay? There are alternative types of futures, which I've been talking about a lot. The used future is also a kind of colonized future. It's where we expect big business to be running things for eternity. Okay? The future is colonized with a way of being. Men are going to be men, women are going to be women. Indigenous people are going to stay indigenous. They can be over there because they don't actually enter my space very much. It's about having futures in my head, my expectations, my assumptions that are working towards cities are going to be cities. They're going to be big, they're going to be polluted, they're going to be exciting and stimulating, but they're also going to be very destructive and violent and so on. There are collapse futures. Oh, that's where the end is nigh, the end is nigh, Anthropocene. Climate change is going to destroy everything. There will be no human complex culture or civilization in 2 centuries. There's transformative futures. That's where AI is going to save the day, or technology they're techno-futurists, or no, we're going to have, like behind me here, we're going to have solar punk futures, where things are so different. Okay. Another way of thinking about it across time, and of course, temporality is really important, is something like the futures cone, where we can say we're looking through this futures cone. I can see a probable future. I can see the future I'd like. There is a bunch of plausible futures out there, and everything is possible. Is it really? Who knows? But we have to assume that in a world where no rules apply anymore, no historical causality fits in, anything could be possible. Just a fun way of thinking about it. And of course, I'm now throwing stuff at you. Just say, think about this, okay? Here's another one to think about. How do we think about trends? There are trends in the present. Very cleverly, Andrew Curry and gone out of my head, came up with this 3 horizons model, okay? We've got a period of transformation. Transformation sounds great, doesn't it? But it's really turbulence, chaotic, uncertain, unsure, and then a new future emerges. That's the 3rd horizon. So we can say that now we are in a period of urban transformation. We're already almost passing horizon number 1, where cities were where everything that was humanly vital was going to happen most often. Cities are starting to struggle with their own identities. So we're entering a period of transformation. Transformation is good in the sense that it is open, it's deeply disturbing, deeply uncertain, it's post-normal, okay? That means what was, in my generation, old bloke, in my generation, what a city was secure, it was balanced, it was stable, but no, they're not like that anymore. And in the future, what will they be? There are emergent trends, things that are underneath but it's kind of like mammals with dinosaurs, I guess. We take dinosaur, then we've got a period of megafauna change here, and then we've got the period of mammals ruling over here. Mammals that you would never have expected because they're only like that size, little furry characters, when the Jurassic period came to a crashing end with the comet that meteorite that hit the Earth and finished off the dinosaurs. They were already actually almost over and done with anyway. They had 130 million years or so. That was a pretty good go. We'll be lucky if we even get a few 100,000 years. Let's see. One other tool, and I've got two of them here. I just want to show you how these work. Amit Paul's playing with this one. He's a friend of mine from Iceland who does really interesting work. Okay, this is a cross-impact matrix. Put two lines together like that and put whatever you like on the axes. He put flow and control, fear and love. So if you're afraid, but you're into flow, then he's describing it as escape. This is where you go to escape. But if you have flow and love, you have thriving. You're going to thrive, where everything's going to go beautifully well together. If you have flow and control, you have parenting. You have the benevolent patriarch, the benevolent dictator, whatever you like. If you have fear and control, you have paralysis. What does he do with this? Well, he says, okay, we can move around in this thing. And this is the way you can work with clients or with your own thinking or with your own group. You can say, okay, what if we started off here with escape? Let's run away. No, I don't want to run away. What about committing to staying and working towards thriving instead of escaping? We're going to thrive. Escape is a walled urban environment, closed communities. We're not going to let those other people in. They're going to spoil everything. They're going to take all the resources. They'll make the place dirty. They'll speak funny languages that I don't understand. They'll make me uncomfortable. No, I'm going to love diversity and we're going to thrive. The parenting, the benevolent dictator or the strong father figure needs to let go. Stop trying to control everything. Allow flow, okay? Here we've got something happening. Can the stern father figure, can the president, the prime minister, the economics minister, can the central banks let go and trust? It's hard to believe, isn't it? But that's when principle number 13, and our assumptions about this, assertions about the future need to be absurd. How about paralysis and fear? So Amit's got three things here. Toward unconditional trust, knocked off the pedestal, bonk, we're then going to try and escape, okay? Or getting curious, where we're moving from paralysis to control and love. We want to get curious first. This is a process that will take us ultimately, hopefully, to thrival. So a very simple two double matrix is a great tool. I often use it. It can sort of give you much to think about, and you can just play with the quadrants like that. So we're heading towards the last couple of slides here. You've been very understanding and listening to me. Maybe you've gone off and paused it a few times and made a cup of tea, coffee, had a sandwich or a nap. But anyway, I can't finish talking about futures without discussing scenarios, okay? Why? Because cultures are story machines. Scenarios feed into our narrative impulse. I wrote about scenarios. I was writing a lot in 2014. Maybe it's the same article, actually. Scenario process enables participants to see narratives as process. It can also enable participants to identify their current narrative context. What's happening now? Whose scenario am I living? In this way, scenarios help us distance ourselves from the dominant scripts or narratives and see the world with new eyes. Okay? We can do scenario mapping. That's what this one here, the NN group, okay? We can look at different kinds of scenarios. It might be something that many of you choose to do for your Friday activity at the end of the summer school. I'm going to throw in a couple of interesting ideas here. Something I was writing about in 28 and 9. But this one again appears in that article from 2014, Futures, Concepts and Effects. Okay, shamanic futures. A shaman is someone who stands somewhere in this liminal space between a given, this is the reality that we're in, and a possibility. So shamanic futures thinking seeks to understand agency, what I can do, as a relational expression within context, okay? Relational and context come up there. CLA, for instance, as a rhizomic and hybrid map of context is well placed to facilitate that. That's one of the reasons why I concentrated on it. Hybridity defines the process nature of the life world, as it is the product of rhizomic, that means multiple, confused, unpredictable encounters. And then to conclude, the emptiness, because CLA, you have to fill it yourself, or your clients do, or whoever you're working with. The emptiness of CLA means that it is the ultimate rhizome. Rhizomes are those things that grow under the ground and mix up and get all mixed up in all sorts of places, and you throw a bit of rhizome over there and it can pick up and start growing again. All in connection, movement with direction linked to intention. As with the compass in Johnny Depp's character Sparrow, Jack Sparrow from the Pirates of the Caribbean, CLA is a tool for reaching a more optimal place, a desired end. Okay, if you like that, using, because it generates CLA spawn scenarios. Why? Because it has metaphor at its very basis, at its heart. Okay, so let's relate all that I've just talked you through to city futures for a moment. Just, and this is a shopping list, basically. Okay, how human are cities? These are ways of questioning what we're going to do with cities. What cities do we fear? You know, those dark cities from the Batman movies. Or what do we long for in a city? Cities as sites of relationship. Okay, one of the things about cities, of course, it's a place where people are anonymous. I was walking around Lisbon today, and of course, I didn't know anybody. How smart, technologically or innovatively or whatever, structurally, can cities be? Who wins in our city's imaginaries? That's a critical question. What might a city-less world look like? Yeah, what happens if there were no cities? What happens if we had a dispersed, interconnected world where things that happen in cities were distributed around the planet in ways using internet and so on? It's an interesting question. How could we live differently if we live in cities? What changes could we make? That urban garden movement, for instance, is an interesting. How green can cities be? What about degrowth and affluence? What happens to those in cities? And what might a regenerative city be? These are fascinating questions for me. Cities then become possibly places of magic and wonder. You know, they kind of, as I've said, I've worked in Singapore a few times. You know, that Singapore is trying to make itself into a city that is for its people, but also creates wonder and magic. You know, the fantastic lights and the light gardens that they've created at night. So wonderful, but doesn't do the trick. You can decide. So I'm inviting you now through futures thinking, maybe with media art and design, the mad stuff that Maya's talking about, you know, in that connection, bring them together. Creative, juicy, rich human things, bring them together. Can we release the imagination? The imagination, as I said, is a great human asset, but it is shackled to the past, to tradition and context and habit. Anticipatory imagination pushes some of that away, or puts it at least into context, to explore what is in plain view, but we don't see. We inhabit these imagined orders that Yuval Harari talks about in his book, Sapiens. Futures thinking grows out of our collective intelligence of the room. Who's in the room is what counts, and that's what Maya says a lot and emphasizes in her article that I was referring to. Futures is committed to optimal outcomes for those conducting it, but those outcomes can be bad or good. You must remember that optimal for some people is suboptimal for many, or for other creatures invested in our planet's future. It offers pathways or actions to be taken to achieve the futures we desire. So finally, method and madness. We're not looking for answers, but for insight, an informed direction, and a sense of agency, sense that we can actually achieve futures that are going to be ones we can be proud of because we are ancestors of the future. What will they look back and say about us? The present is remarkable. It certainly is, and can be different from what it is. Optimism and its companions, joy and fun, need to be at work here. And finally, what resources do we have to escape the cage of imagined orders? Well, I think we've got a lot. Critical resources, but we've got one another, and we've got other species, other possibilities as well. So my invitation to you is think about our human futures now also. So thinking about our human futures now also involves planetary futures. How do we think the big picture? Planetary futures involves all that makes up who we are. Our inner selves, microbes and elephants, oceans and stars, galaxies, photons, quarks, you know. So I'm looking forward to seeing you on Monday. I hope this gives you some context for what we're going to be doing over the week. Take care. Love that picture.